bar is loading. Of course, now it's decided that it's time to have a fight. Okay, so it looks like we are live. If someone could just put in the comments whether they can hear us, that would be amazing, because this isn't the clearest, but I would just like to welcome you all to Facebook Live, this RCVS Knowledge Facebook Live event. And basically, this is how it's going to work, is that we're all going to chat about anything and everything. And if you've got any comments or questions, pop them in the text box and I will do my best to keep up with them. Thank you so much for confirming that you can all hear me. I really appreciate it. Of course, now my cat decides to walk in front of the camera. I'm going to hand over to Amanda, who is new chair of RCVS Knowledge and Board of Trustees, and I'll let her introduce everyone. So over to you, Amanda.
Hi, evening everyone, or evening for those of us in the UK, but I know we're being joined from people around the world today, so morning or afternoon to those of you who are in different time zones. But it really does give me great pleasure as the new chair of the RCVS Knowledge Board of Trustees that my first event is one that's so close to my heart as an emergency critical care specialist. So I'm really delighted this evening that we have three fantastic panelists here to discuss CPR in veterinary practice, and how the RECOVER guidelines, which were first published about 8 years ago, which are a brilliant example of the profession showing leadership in evidence-based medicine and quality improvement, how they came about and how they're evolving as they're now being re-looked at. So I'm really delighted to introduce Dan Fletcher, who is an associate professor at Cornell in upstate New York. So it's good afternoon to Dan. Jamie Burkett, who is an assistant professor at UCD California. So it's good morning to Jamie. And Manu Bolla, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Melbourne. So it's an even earlier good morning, good morning to Manu. So Manu and Dan really spearheaded the first version of the RECOVER guidelines, and Jamie's joined the crew now as it all gets reevaluated with the evidence base added to. So I'm really looking forward to hearing these guys chat about how it all came about and what they've learned, as well as taking the questions coming in from you guys as well. So over to you guys to tell us about how it all started.
Sure, I can kick it off. The RECOVER initiative started back in 2010, I guess, when I was interested in trying to develop some standardized training for CPR. And so I reached out to Manu because he was at that time working in a resuscitation lab at the University of Pennsylvania. And I figured he would be a great person to collaborate with on developing sort of standardized training. And so I reached out to him and asked him if he would be interested. And he said he would love to be interested, but he had no idea how to do CPR in dogs and cats because we didn't really have an evidence base. We didn't have standardized way to approach it because no one had ever actually tried to answer that question. So we had traditionally sort of, every time human guidelines would come out, we would someone from the veterinary field would look at them and would try to translate them in a way and write a paper to say this is how we should do it. But no one had ever done what they do in human medicine, which is to go back and look at the primary source literature and interpret it in the light of dogs and cats initially, and really try to answer the question specifically for dogs and cats. And so that sort of led to this adventure, which was quite a large project the first time around, to try to actually recruit a bunch of volunteers to try to answer a bunch of questions. And in that first round, we looked at 72 individual questions about how to do CPR. And so we recruited just over 100 people, board certified specialists, to help us, where each specialist took on a question and tried to answer it by looking at the source literature. And then using the answers that they came up with to those questions, we wrote the guidelines, established consensus around them through the American College of Veterinary Emergency and Critical Care, and ultimately published those in 2012. So that's kind of how the whole thing started, out of a desire to teach. And we figured that we had to figure out what we wanted to teach by starting with that first process. So that's kind of how it all began.
Right. And it was a really quite an interesting time. And I just want to emphasize also how important it was for everybody's contribution. As Dan said, there was a lot of other people involved, and none of us have really been, I guess, had the opportunity, to bring everybody together and build something like that was not possible for Dan himself or me myself, right? So this was really a group effort. And we also were very fortunate at the time that we had good relationships to the Human Resuscitation Group, like ILCOR, the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation, which happened to be working in our lab as well. So the chair of ILCOR was one of my lab colleagues, Vinay Nadkarni. And so that really helped us to not having to reinvent the wheel and develop the methodology and all of the things on how actually go about the evidence evaluation from scratch. So they were fortunate enough to work with us. We had an advisory committee for that, and ILCOR was on there and various other stakeholders. And together we really did that. So I think it's a great story also of what one can achieve when everybody works together, pulls in the same direction. Yep.
And on that first round, I was an evidence evaluator. So I was one of the people who helped evaluate evidence in the monitoring domain on the first iteration. So I had at that stage some kind of in the trenches understanding of the initiative, but have joined later on the 2.0 initiative just a couple of years ago.
And we're very grateful to have the extra help.
Well, thank you.
Especially because
it's
Manu
been
and
a
I
lot of
are
fun.
getting very old. So
I am older than Manu.
Well, you look much younger, Jamie. So
you look much younger. Lovely.
I guess the last thing I would say is sort of about the initiative as a whole is that, people know about the Recover Initiative. If they know about it, it's because of the guidelines and potentially from the training. But I think from the start, it's always been a sort of a three-pronged initiative. We wanted to develop evidence-based guidelines, which is how it started. And in that process to identify knowledge gaps. And the idea of identifying knowledge gaps was then to motivate future research. And so another really important part of the initiative is research. So trying to foster and encourage research in CPR in dogs and cats to answer some of those questions that were identified from the knowledge gaps. And then the third sort of prong of this approach is education. So trying to teach people how best to do CPR. And ultimately, that was the initial motivation and is now something that we're very proud of, that we have standardized online and in-person CPR certification for the first time in veterinary medicine through the initiative. And we're very proud of that.
So literally my first thought when you were talking about the project was how incredibly overwhelming it sounded just for you to go, you know what, I want to do this. So they are coming up for review soon. I think it says on the website that they are going to be reviewed. Have you seen a massive change in available evidence around since the first time around, or I like that grin that just came from it of
So I think the interesting thing about this what we've described so far was the first round that we did back in 2011, 2012. We're currently heavy into the Recover 2.0 process. So Jamie, Manu, and I have spent the bulk of this week and many hours of Zoom meetings reviewing where we are right now and in terms of the questions we've asked. So I think the exciting thing about 2.0, there are a number of exciting things about 2.0. So the first exciting thing is that we're taking a completely different approach to evidence evaluation, which is much more in line with how clinical guidelines are now done in all of human medicine using what's called the GRADE approach. So it's a much more systematic and rigorous approach to evidence evaluation that really provides a framework for looking at each individual paper that's going to be assessed for a specific question and really grading the strength of that paper. So looking at the study design and how well it relates to the question we're actually asking. So that GRADE approach, this was, as far as I'm aware, the first time this has been done in veterinary medicine. And we're basically doing it for on the order of 200 individual questions. So talk about overwhelming. We're incredibly overwhelmed right now trying to work our way through the first approach at doing these reviews this way and a whole new system. I think the other really exciting thing about this new round of evidence evaluation is that rather the first time through, Jamie can speak to this, we ask the evidence evaluators to do every aspect of it, including the initial literature searches. The really exciting thing about Recover 2.0 in terms of the robustness of those searches is that we've gotten a group of about 15 information specialists from veterinary libraries all over the world who are actually doing the searches for us. So we provide them the questions and they work with our domain chairs, and they're actually exhaustively searching the literature. And so we're very optimistic that we're going to catch a lot of the things that we probably missed the first time around that were probably available in the literature then that we didn't find because, we were sort of doing our own search strategies, not by experts. So I think that's a really exciting piece too. And then the third exciting piece about the new version is that we've added 3 new domains. So the first time through, we had domains on basic life support, advanced life support, prevention and preparedness, monitoring, and post-cardiac arrest care. This time we're doing all 5 of those again, but then we've also added in 3 new domains: first aid, which I'm really excited about because I think a lot of us teach first aid, but teach it based on what we think is the right thing to do, not necessarily based on the literature. So we'll have some answers to those questions. We also will have one on large animals. So that was something we wanted to do the first time around and weren't able to, and we're very excited to be able to include that this time. And then the other new domain, which I think is really exciting, is newborn resuscitation. So pretty much any veterinarian or veterinary nurse or technician does a lot of resuscitation of newborn puppies and kittens, and we're actually have a whole domain looking at questions specifically around how best to do that. So what's changed? I think what's changed mostly is we're even more overwhelmed than we were the first time, but it's coming together pretty well. But I think we have a much more rigorous approach this time. Will we find a whole lot of new literature? I think we'll find new literature from the human and experimental worlds. Unfortunately, there's still not a lot of clinical veterinary literature. There are a few new papers that have come out, but not a ton. And I'm hoping that, again, we're going to help to foster that approach to actually trying to answer these questions in clinical veterinary patients. So yeah, I think a lot of new stuff.
I am overwhelmed, excited just by all your new stuff. So sorry,
and
Jamie,
I
go
definitely
ahead.
think based on the when we see the search strategies, the search strings that the expert information specialists, so the specialty librarians, put together to make sure that we have an exhaustive search of the primary literature regarding these PICO questions. These search strings are a paragraph each. It's a huge amount of text. Definitely humbling as a prior evidence evaluator when I was, typing in, 3 or 4 words into the top of the search bar on PubMed and hoping to come across the important information. So I have a lot of faith in the robustness of the searches this time. And I am really excited about the new literature that I do think we will be uncovering, even the newly uncovering even old literature to include.
And it was always an interest of ours to include everybody, within the emergency and critical care anesthesia domain to participate, not just academics from universities. So I think having the information specialists doing those searches really allowed us to then invite people without library access, for example, to still then evaluate those articles according to the grade scheme that we developed across the board, right? So I think it really becomes in a community kind of effort as opposed to an academic driven one. And we already, I think, did that quite well the first time around, but I think with now the information specialists contributing this, it really opened the door for that even more so. So we're pretty happy about that as well.
Yeah, I think the other change that's happened this time around is that we, as we called for volunteers, we tried to expand our scope a bit. So we have criticalists, obviously, but we've also expanded it. And we have a relatively large number of veterinary technicians who are contributing this time as well as people from other specialties and non-boarded specialists who are interested. So it's been exciting to see, the first time around, we had to beat the bushes and try to drum up the people we needed. And we had multiple people who had to cover multiple questions because we just didn't have enough folks to answer them all. I just checked our database yesterday as we were looking through and assigning some questions that had just come up to be ready. And we have over 300 people who volunteered to help this time. And currently we have about 150 of them actively involved in the evidence evaluation process. The other exciting thing that's allowed us to do is for each question that we're asking, the last time we had one person evaluate the answer to that question. And this time we've been able to assign 2 evidence evaluators to each question. So we'll have input from 2 independent people who can evaluate it and give us their input. So I think it should allow us to really increase how robust these recommendations are at the end of the day.
And can you give a quick explanation? You mentioned the grade way of evaluating evidence. Are you able to give us just a quick explanation of how that's different from the last time?
Yeah, I think grade is an interesting process. So we're, I would say, at the end of the day, we're not experts either. So
she giveth and she taketh away.
Yeah, so we're learning as we go, and it's been an interesting process. So we had to dig pretty deeply into grade when we first started this second round, when we decided to go this route. And as part of that process, we actually developed an online system to do this. So we know it's a complex process, and we wanted to make it as simple as we could for the evidence evaluators so that they didn't have to be experts to be able to actually contribute. And so we basically took the grade approach and we turned it into a website where for each paper, the evidence evaluator is answering a series of questions about that paper that gives us the information we need to use grade. So grade basically is a way to take a look at an individual paper and to first look at the study design in general to look for evidence of bias in the way the study was designed. So what comes out of that is a number of independent measures of risk of bias in the study to begin with, and that's based on a series of very specific questions. And so we can get an idea about, looking at the study design, what were the weaknesses in it. And then once we have that part done, then we look at each outcome that we're assessing. And so this is another thing that we tightened up quite a lot this time. Each question has a series of specific outcomes we want to know about. So that might be return of spontaneous circulation, that might be survival to discharge, that might be perfusion markers, so things like blood pressure and things like that. So we look at each individual outcome, and then we ask a series of questions for each outcome about how that paper contributes to the answer to the question. And so that'll be things like, was the patient population for this particular outcome the one that we were interested in? Was there indirectness in that patient population, or indirectness in the intervention that was being studied in this particular paper? Was there imprecision in the results? So maybe they got a statistically significant difference between groups, but maybe that wasn't really a clinically significant difference. Maybe it was very tiny, and so maybe there was some degree of imprecision in that outcome that we need to know about. And then we want to know, are there things about the study that actually make it more valuable because they found a difference, even though there were confounders in it that you would think would make it less likely to find a difference between the groups. And so we may rank it up. And so basically what grade does is it takes a paper, it says, okay, here's the study design. Is it a randomized controlled trial? If so, we really count on this a lot. This has got very high value. If it's a case report, it's going to start out much lower on the evidence pyramid. And then we ask all of these questions, and the answers to those questions allow that paper to be either pushed down in terms of its strength for that particular question, or pushed up. And then we take all of the different papers and we look at where they all fell, and that allows us to give an overall ranking of sort of how strong the evidence was for this particular question by looking across papers. So it's a very rigorous method to do this. It's definitely a lot more work for the evidence evaluators this time around, because they're not allowed to just say, I think this is a good paper. They have to answer the questions about why it's a good paper or why it might not be so great. But again, the goal is to make it both reproducible and robust. So I think the combination of a very explicit way of ranking the value of a study, as well as having 2 separate evidence evaluators who are doing the same thing, so that we can look across the evidence evaluators and make sure they have the same general trends in things, is really going to allow us to have a much more robust set of guidelines.
Do you have a ranking where, say, for example, if it's that ranking, then not good enough evidence, it doesn't make the cut, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I would say across questions, there are things like that. So certainly you get to the point where you say, there's no evidence for this question that we can actually make a recommendation based upon. So an individual paper can be pushed down to the point where you say it's not very useful evidence, but then if all of the papers for that question get pushed down there, you may find yourself with saying that my answer to this question is I can't answer the question because I don't have enough evidence to drive it. Now, at the end of the day, we'll probably still write a guideline about it, and then it will be explicitly marked as a guideline that's based on very low quality evidence, and probably that's based on expert opinion. So this is an important concept about the recovery guidelines the last time and this time. We do recognize that if you're going to do CPR, you can't just say, oh, don't really have any evidence for how to do chest compression, so I guess we won't do those, right? Like, you can't do that. So at the end of the day, the point of the recovery guidelines is that they are, each guideline is very transparently described in terms of the evidence associated with it. And some of that evidence may just be expert opinion, in which case it's explicitly called out as expert opinion.
And
did you consider options other than grade, or was it this kind of the standout? It sounds like it's, you said, very robust, but a lot of work as well. So was it something that was kind of an obvious go-to to evolve Recover towards, or was there a bit of debate amongst the group about how to proceed with the Recover 2.0?
Well, there was some debate, but ILCOR has moved in that direction, and so we had some kind of experience a little bit, and their experience, basically how it all panned out. And once more, we got some support from them all together on what to expect. Having said that, in hindsight, then maybe it was a major undertaking. It was bigger than we thought it would be, and it's mostly the aforementioned software package, and then the uptraining and upskilling of everybody involved, and so on and so forth. So it's a major undertaking. But I think with many of those things, it's an investment in the future. And you know, to always come back to the theme that it's a group contribution, right? I think it really leverages the evidence evaluation capacity of the whole community, right? So if we would go through that process again for other questions, be it sepsis or trauma or this or that, right? So we already have a cohort of quite skilled people that can contribute in other areas as well. CPR is not the only knowledge gap thing, you know, not the only guidelines requiring specialty. So I think it's beyond Recover, so to say. I think that, and I think for us, it was a big driver to do this as well. I think we probably could have used the previous system, you know, and just do it all over again, add the other domains that we, you know, newborn, large animal with the old system. And but I think we really want to push the envelope a little bit here.
I feel like sort of
that you continue to innovate that.
Almost feel like the garden gnome that should be in the picture with all three of us and the executive committee would be the website developers who have pushed through a shocking number of requests for tailoring. And well, we might have said we thought we wanted that, but in the end, actually, we didn't want that. We wanted this other thing instead, as we have worked to make a system that should allow different groups to apply this group evidence evaluation process to multiple different subjects across veterinary medicine, really. So it's a really amazing system that they've put together, that I think we could not be doing what we're doing without that.
Yeah. Cool.
So I just wanted to bring up as well, obviously, we all know about the Recover guidelines. I don't think there's any veterinary person ever that doesn't know about the Recover guidelines. If not, read them. So there was a paper released recently of measuring kind of people's confidence and compliance with CPR before the Recover guidelines and after the Recover guidelines, which I found really interesting. It was just the veterinary surgeon responses, though, this time round, wasn't it? It wasn't any of the other responses. And I found that a lot of people that weren't compliant, it was potentially because they just didn't have equipment, not because the knowledge wasn't there. So I guess, what are your thoughts on kind of that the knowledge is there, but the equipment isn't?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I think we it's not just the equipment necessarily, it's just, you know, the practice setting all together. Like, do we actually provide guidelines that are totally based on evidence, and they are absolutely perfect, and they are, you know, well flushed out, but nobody can use them. You know, like everybody should go on cardiopulmonary bypass, or everybody should do, you know, like evidence, let's say, for for open chest CPR is really, really strong, right? Like if you're just about generating blood flow, open every larger dog's chest, right? And massage that heart internally. But that's not necessarily something that a lot of people find very helpful in practice. So it's always like, yeah, we want to have the guidelines, and here is really what we recommend, but we also understand that it needs to be translatable into actually practical actionability, right? Because otherwise it's kind of useless. And I think the equipment questions, a lot of people for most do not have defibrillators, right? And so we certainly have guidelines for that, because the evidence is very, very strong that without a defibrillator, converting ventricular fibrillation into a perfusing rhythm is a really hard thing to do. So it would be ludicrous for us to not recommend that, even though we know that only 1% of private practices, like have actually a defibrillator outside of emergency practices. And so I think what we tried with the guidelines is to some extent also inspire people to purchase those things, over time, not immediately. But for example, a capnograph is another thing that a lot of people do not have, but we think it's a really useful tool. So we hope that with the guidelines over time, when they have to make their next purchase decisions, maybe they think, oh, okay, a capnograph is actually a really useful thing, right? So let's get it. And then over time, we maybe see that change, right? The other big problem is with team size, right? So if you only have like 2 people in your team, how can you, have a quite involved advanced life support scenario unfolding when you basically have somebody who can deliver breath and somebody who can deliver chest compressions. So there's all of those things as well. And so that is a practical issue. I totally understand that.
But I think it was really promising that people had the knowledge. So if they had the equipment, or if they had the volume expansers and things like that, then they would have done that. And the fact that the knowledge was there instilled in everyone, I thought was great.
I think a really important thing, though, to emphasize here, and I hope that anyone watching this hears and believes this. If you look at the guidelines and you look at the algorithm, remember that the first 2 things on the algorithm, number 1 and 2, everybody can do: chest compressions and ventilation. And if you look at the literature and you look at the evidence behind all of the interventions we talk about in that 101 guidelines that we wrote, the strongest evidence is for basic life support, chest compressions and ventilation. And I would argue that for most people in a general practice setting who are dealing with arrests that are most likely, I would say in most of them, are going to be peri-anesthetic arrests, right? It's probably going to be a relatively healthy patient who then has a peri-anesthetic arrest. If you just know how to do good quality basic life support and maybe give some epinephrine, although that may not even be as important, you have a good chance of getting that patient back. That most recent data out of UC Davis suggested something like 14 times more likelihood of survival to discharge in the peri-anesthetic patients than in any other patient, right? And that was at a tertiary referral facility that's seeing very, very sick patients. So I think what I would say is that data to me is super encouraging. If you know what you're supposed to do and you're comfortable with basic life support, advanced life support isn't that important. What's fun? I always say this when I lecture on this. It's the sexy thing, right? It's the drawing up the drugs, and it's the charging the defibrillator and shouting clear, and it's watching the patient jump when you defibrillate them.
That's all really cool. Grey's Anatomy.
Right? Yeah, it's really cool. Grey's Anatomy, I like to shock asystole, which is, I feel like it's my life's work to get that out of there. But regardless, I think that if you know what you're supposed to do and you are confident with your basic life support, you're going to get a lot of patients back just by doing that. Yeah. So I don't think it should be discouraging. And the way Manu's paper described that, it was, this compliance was the term that was used. And I would argue that it's not necessarily compliance, it's just whether you're able to do those particular things. But if you look at people's basic life support skills, that's just the most important thing. So it's worth learning how to do that. It's worth understanding what advanced life support, what the algorithm says and what you should do, so that whatever things you have, you can use. If you have some adrenaline, if you have some atropine, you know what to do with it. But just because you don't, I say this all the time as well, just because you don't have a defibrillator, that does not give you permission to not do CPR. You are still required to do CPR, especially in a patient who arrested due to an acute reversible problem like anesthesia, right? Like, you are obliged, you should be comfortable doing CPR in those patients. And that's where we can have a huge impact, because those are the patients we can actually turn around.
Yeah. And Dan, I think you spoke for us many years ago at our EBVM conference, and I actually listened to it quite recently, and you said a great line, which is I think it was a certain percentage of animals will survive to discharge, and those that don't were probably going to die anyway. You
Yeah.
know, the ones that, you know, just because they've crashed, they're not coming back because your CPR is not good enough. It's probably because, you know, they've got really bad renal failure, or, you know, they've got a lot of blood loss. And it's important to kind of take that into consideration when you're looking at your CPR and kind of your, I don't want to say success, but I can't think of another word right now.
I mean, I feel like my perspective on it is there are patients who arrest and there are patients who die, right? Death is irreversible.
Yeah.
Is it wrong to do CPR on a patient who's died? No, I don't think it is. The patient is not here, and it gives your team an opportunity to practice and to be better prepared for those patients who do have an acute reversible problem. And it may give the clients the closure that they need to feel like they did everything they could. So I don't think it's wrong to try CPR on any patient where you have permission from the client. But I also think it's important that you discuss with your team when you're done that there's no reason to feel badly if you don't get a patient back, right? You learn from it. You can reflect on what happened. You can talk about how you can be better prepared next time. But I think it's important not to get discouraged from trying CPR just because you have a low success rate, because the reality is you're trying an intervention on a disease process or a process that may not have a very good prognosis, except in some specific circumstances. And it's important to talk about that after it's done during your debrief. You know, I think really reflecting on it and saying, hey, you guys did a great job. You followed the algorithm. Look at how well we worked as a team. This was a case that was tough, and it was unlikely we were getting this one back. But look at what we learned and look at what we're able to offer to this client. And then when you do have that acute reversible arrest that you get back, then you can really celebrate it and reflect back on all those cases that you didn't get back because you just didn't have a chance with those. But look at how they prepared us to be there for this patient that did have a chance. So I think reframing that as leaders in the clinic is so important to keep people motivated to keep trying this, because it's a great feeling when you get them back, right? And there's every reason to think that we can get a lot of these back.
I think the reflection is so important. And actually, as you were talking to me, reminded me of a case that I'm sure my old colleagues who are listening are gonna identify. But it's basically a German Shepherd that kind of crashed out of nowhere, and it was just like a scene from Grey's Anatomy. You know, the whole team, we were absolutely on it. We had the chest compressions, we had the breathing, we had the ECG, we had the capnograph, we were switching in, switching out, and everything. We were constantly communicating. And unfortunately, we couldn't get the dog back. There was too much disease process. But at the end of it, we kind of all sat there, got a cup of tea, obviously, English, got a cup of tea, had a sit down, and all spoke about it. And although it was terrible to lose a patient that we'd been nursing that badly, we all agreed that, you know, actually we were so prepared for the CPR, we were so organized, and we left the day feeling that, you know, we'd done absolutely everything we could for that patient, and the owner agreed as well. And like every time I think of CPR, I go back to that moment of I couldn't have imagined a team being kind of more organized than we were at that point.
Yeah, and I think some people look at the basic fairly low discharge rate of patients who undergo CPR following cardiopulmonary arrest. But even the most dismal single-digit percentage numbers are all greater than 0, which is the number of them that would leave the hospital if we never tried. So certainly for those that have these acute and potentially reversible disease processes, the evidence is in their favor that it is absolutely worthwhile trying. So I think our goal is to help provide people with the tools they need to do a good job for those cases.
Absolutely. I just need to interject here quickly just to say to everyone that you might have noticed that our comments are being absolutely spammed to death. I can't find any comments from anyone. I will get through them as much as I can afterwards once the spammers stop. But if you do have anything, if you comment directly on our page or just email ebvm@rcvsknowledge.org, and hopefully I'll be able to see it. And just really sorry, we're trying as hard as we can, but they are on one this evening.
The only comments I've seen in between from actual people are people saying, this is really annoying.
I'm really sorry,
Keep doing
guys.
this.
We
so
have,
annoying.
I have a team who are working so hard, but they're just, computers are just faster than us, and I'm really sorry.
Right.
But as I said, either
What are
comment
you gonna do?
on our page or email, or just listen, and we'll try and cover as much as we can.
We decided we were really excited that we were a big enough deal that there were spammers after us. So it's good. It's all
Wow, we're spamming.
Yay. A new milestone.
Absolutely. So regarding the recent paper, Manny, were you impressed with the results that came out? Were you pleased that there seemed to be a positive trends?
Yeah, given that we talk about evidence here, I have to say that that paper is all based on survey information, right? So it's not necessarily a fully representative sample of what people really think, and certainly not what they do in practice, right? We basically asked them about how do you perform CPR in practice, and we asked those same questions in 2010 and 2000. It was 2008 and 2018, I think, so like 10 years apart, and so it was quite nice because we were able to ask kind of the same cohort, the same questions. And so that allowed us to contrast them a little bit. And it was quite nice to see that what initially led us to do the Recover initiative, which is that we found, for example, a huge variability in the recommended or in the chest compression rate that they would use, right? So we found that even amongst specialists that some recommended or that some use, let's say 60 compressions per minute, right? Or 80 compressions per minute, even in board certified specialists. And some thought like 120 or 100 or like, so there was a huge variability. And we found that after the guidelines, that has really narrowed down quite a bit. So we have a really quite significant peak now around those 100, compressions per minute. So it seemed that we were able to bring the community back together a little bit, meaning that probably the guidelines were adopted and taken up into practice. It's really hard to show, though, this causal relationship, like between the guidelines and the practice change. But we want to believe that the practice change that was evident in those surveys was, at least in part, a consequence of the guidelines that kind of unified a little bit the practice in cardiopulmonary resuscitation as we see it now. Yeah, so I was pretty happy about that. And other really interesting finding in the paper was that we asked them whether the Recover guidelines, affected how they conduct basic life support. And most people said, yes, it really did. We asked them how it affected their advanced life, how they do advanced life support. Yes, it really did change their practice as well. And then we asked whether it affected their numbers of ROSC patients that they saw. And they said, maybe 50% said yes. The others said, well, not really. And then we asked them whether it affected their survival to discharge rates, right? And so there, maybe 25% thought, yes, it did. And the others thought maybe not. So there's some uncertainty regarding how this all ultimately impacts outcome, and that this is really, though, what we're interested in, at the heart of the matter. So I think we need more data to show that as well. I think it's a hard thing to do in a survey, but that's a little bit where the skepsis is within the community. And like we do all of that, and as you said, right, the team feels really, really well. We did everything with this German Shepherd in a way we were never believed that we would be able to do it so well, right? So it worked really flawlessly. But there's so many other factors that ultimately affect the outcome that it is a little bit a harder sell there. But we're working quite hard on collecting large data sets with the CPR to Recover registry as well to show a little bit how the outcome, such as like survival to discharge, changes over time. And hopefully we'll be able to show more of a trend there as well to get some data. People need data. I think everybody, we need data to make clear statements there. So that's an important part as well. Yeah.
Right,
it looks like the comment feed is clean.
Yes, that's what I was just about to say. I'm just catching up on some comments. That's what the email bit was all about. Someone asked for it.
Cool.
So there's a bit of talk about, give me 2 seconds, hang on.
Lots of
Are
questions
you
about
catch up there,
furosemide.
Amelia? Can
Sorry?
I was going to actually, while you catch up there, I was just going to ask about the training aspect as well, because you know the guidelines themselves are so important, and just having them is so incredibly valuable. But also, I know you guys have done a huge amount of training and supporting implementation of the guidelines as well. So is that something where, if you reflect back on the last 10 years, what have you learned there about how you actually then can disseminate and support individuals to actually, as you say, learn it and then put it into practice in their own environments?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to be doing something like this because of the opportunity to do to spread this information online. It's, you know, obviously in human medicine forever, for a very long time, mandatory CPR training has been part of maintaining licensure, and that's never been the case in veterinary medicine. So we all sort of learn it when we go to vet school or we go to nursing school, and then we would just do that for the rest of our lives and never get updated. So this has been an exciting part. And my, as I said at the very beginning, my major motivation for getting involved in this project was because I was interested in trying to teach people how to do CPR. And I think having this opportunity to do that via standardized online training, which is what we offer now through the Recover Initiative, and then to have progressed into these in-person labs that we do with simulation, I think it's been a really exciting thing. And I think what you know, of course I'm biased because I'm bought into this and I'm an evangelist, but it's been an interesting progression for me, because when I started here at Cornell, it was before Recover existed, and I taught CPR, but I taught it, you know, the way I've always taught CPR, the way I learned CPR. And then we did the guidelines, and then we developed the online course, and then we developed the in-person certification. And now for the last few years, all of the students in our third year class do the online course, and then we do the certification lab with them. And I feel like there's a big difference in what I see in the clinic. So my experience before we had this type of training was that when an arrest would occur, although the students, if I asked them questions about it, they could rattle off answers. When an arrest would occur, they would back into the corner, and maybe I could get them to take the recording sheet and they would write things down, but that was about the extent of it. They were really terrified by it. And now what I see when there's an arrest is they're pushing everybody out of the way because they want to get in and do it, because they've actually practiced it with the certification lab, and they feel like they feel much more confident. And happily, you know, then there's this question, okay, are they unconsciously incompetent, right? So are they confident, but they don't actually know what they're doing? But the good news is when I'm there and I get to watch them, I can see, and they certainly seem to get it. They seem to know what they're doing, and they're really good at following the guidelines. They look immediately up to the poster because they've learned it, and they know what the algorithm says, and they refresh themselves by looking at it. So I feel like it has an impact. I think if nothing else, it makes people more confident and willing to do it. And I think the other really exciting thing about the Recover training we've developed is that part of that training is learning how to work as a team and talking about team roles and communication, which is, I think, something we don't really teach that well in veterinary medicine. And that's something that we've gotten a lot of feedback on from the people who've taken the course, that they've learn things from it about just how things that apply to any type of emergency situation, how to work together seamlessly as a team, how to communicate clearly and effectively, how to close the loop on communication so that errors are avoided. All of those things that are really nice byproducts of this that weren't certainly the primary focus, I think, have also come out of it. And it sort of led us to this new approach that we're taking to sort of getting the word out about it. You know, we have this sort of three-word tagline that we use: competent, confident, and connected. And that's really been our focus, you know, this connection, this working as a team, the fact that CPR, like much of emergency medicine, is a team sport, and developing those team skills, I would argue, is just as critical as knowing the algorithm. So feeling like you know what you have to do, being confident that you can jump in and participate, and then having that connection with your team so that you can all work together and have each other's backs, I think has the potential to influence not just CPR outcomes, but outcomes overall. So, yeah, it's exciting. I think it's a really exciting time.
And do you think that is something that will come across? Obviously, you do the training as well with the newer guidelines. Do you think that's something that will come across more in the training, kind of the team approach and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, for our prevention and preparedness section, we have specific PICO questions and write specific guidelines on how best to communicate. So we are trying to ramp that up a little bit so that we we have that evidence base to build it on. There's a lot of evidence in the human literature on team training in emergency and critical care environments. And I think we borrow a lot from that, and we borrow a lot of techniques from that as well. So I think that's great. But I think it's now become embedded, like I said, as we're sort of thinking about what is Recover training, what is this educational initiative. Those are the three words, and one of them is connected about that team training and being able to work as a team. It's really something that we've committed to as an organization, and we're interested in expanding that. We're trying to get through the guidelines right now, so trying to expand to additional types of training is going to be a little hard in the short term, but it's something we've talked a lot about. Is what are some other areas that we could start to move into to use evidence-based training to help people function better in veterinary practice, and so I think there's more to come.
Sorry. So some of the comments are coming through. You mentioned, I just want to confirm to someone that yes, large animals are expected in kind of the next round of Recover. I think they missed that beforehand. And will these also be incorporated kind of in the training in the future as large animals and neonates?
That will certainly be the hope. Yes,
yeah.
that we'll be able to incorporate all of that into new training. I mean, at the end of the day, we've always been about guidelines being available to anybody who wants them. So the manuscripts are all available for free to anybody who wants them. They're open access issue of JVEC. The next version will be as well, so people will have free access. And so the information is always there. The training, the idea behind the training was to try to provide a more sort of deliberate type of approach to learning the guidelines that would also allow us to assess people so that they can document that they know how to do this, and they can get a checkbox that says, yes, I've learned it and I've shown that I know this, and that's where the certification comes in. But the guidelines will always be available, and we encourage as many people as possible to read them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a link to the guidelines on our page, or you can just Google the Recover guidelines there. Just someone has just asked about the in-person certification opportunities in the UK. Clearly, I think everything is on hold until this global pandemic decides what it's doing. So I don't think that's a question we can answer at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I will throw out this, that we've been working very hard. So we, sort of as a separate project, we have our simulator that we've developed that we use for a lot of the Recover training. OpenVetSim is tailored for in-person use with a simulator. But what we've been working on for the last few months, and we're sort of beta testing now and should be out soon, is actually something we're calling TeleVetSim, which is going to allow us via Zoom to do this in-person training. So scenario-based training where you'll be looking at videos and images of what's happening. You'll still be in real time managing a case. You'll have the patient monitor. You'll see what's going on with the patient. But the team will work remotely with each other to do it. And so our plan is to implement the Recover certification training in a remote form. Will it be as effective as doing an in-person training? I don't know. I can't answer that question because it's one of the questions I think we'll have to answer. But I do think it will be a way for people to, again, check that box to document that they've worked through it and they're managing these cases in real time. So stay tuned. We're very hopeful that by the end of the year, we'll be ready to launch that. And not only will that make it possible during this nasty pandemic to hopefully get back to certifying people, but I think in the long term, it could be really beneficial as an alternative way for people who live in places where there aren't enough Recover certified trainers around to be able to actually do that in-person quote unquote certification remotely. So I think it's going to have long-term benefits and as well as the short-term benefit of addressing the current pandemic. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
So did you find, as you were going through the evidence, I think one of the challenges we sometimes have is that things can get ingrained, if you like, in veterinary mythology as being the right way to do things, and then actually when you interrogate the evidence you find out that those myths are maybe not quite what they should be. What do you think were the biggest revelations, I guess, in terms of CPR as you went through the evidence, both previously and now, and the kind of, how did you find it in terms of busting some of those veterinary myths as you got the guidelines and the training out there?
I would say, especially currently, when we have super robust searches for evidence, the most obvious thing is how little information there is, and how much of what we are doing is based on expert opinion and indirect information from other species. So that would be, as kind of the newcomer, the main thing that has been impressed upon me is actually how little information there is available for these specific questions. As far as what you all found before, though, Manu and Dan, when you got all the way from the beginning to the end of the first set of them, I'd be interested to hear what you all thought on that first go round. But here, there are many of the PICO questions, so the population intervention comparator outcome style questions that we are answering now. Direct evidence is thin.
Limited.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing is maybe hyperosmolar therapy in the post-cardiac arrest phase. There was absolutely not much, like, and when I was brought up early on, it was like every animal, like after ROSC, that is not, immediately returning to a reasonable improvementation, you give mannitol or something like that. And there was really nothing whatsoever in the literature to support that. There was some evidence on imaging studies and others that there is actually edema, but it's, it's not a routinely occurring phenomenon. And so it was really hard to find anything strongly to support that practice, right? Having said that, the risk, it's always a benefit risk ratio thing, the way that we write the recommendation at the end. And so there's still a recommendation for that as well, but it was surprising how little there was really. The other thing is maybe the intra-arrest fluid resuscitative therapy, right? So given that cardiac arrest is like the ultimate cardiovascular catastrophe, if you want to say so, I think administering resuscitative fluid therapy to those patients during arrest was a relatively common practice. And there it was a little bit the opposite, that we really found quite good evidence that such practice is not necessarily what should be undertaken. So it was kind of, a myth busting in the other way around, but actually having some evidence there to support that recommendation there, to not give routine resuscitative fluid therapy across the board, only to those that have evidence of hypovolemia, I guess.
Yeah, and I think even the basics, right, of basic life support. So Manu's original paper that motivated a lot of this, that he published back in 2010, looking at asking people, even board certified specialists, how fast should you do chest compressions? And about, what was it? I think only 45% of boarded criticalists had the right answer there. And so I think even just having the opportunity to look at the evidence, recognize that the evidence is in dogs, that 60, they do much worse than 120 or 100 to 120. And then being able to report that back out, that's myth busting right there, right? Because if boarded criticalists don't even know how to do it, how is anyone else going to know how to do it? We're the ones who focus on it. So I think even just the basics, the ability to actually definitively be able to say, yes, we have evidence in our species that this is the right way to do it. That's huge. I mean, for me, veterinary medicine was a second career. So even though I have all these gray hairs, I haven't been doing this quite as long as some other people who have as many gray hairs as I do have. And I was lucky to come through at a time when we sort of knew that already, that had already come to pass. And that's how I was trained. But there are lots of people my age who they got their board certification way back when 60 was the recommended one. So I think even just the basics, we're still just, I think I would call those revelations for a lot of people who have been doing this forever and just they don't have CPR training, so they don't know that things have been updated.
Right.
I saw there were some, and I replied to this on the comments, but I did want to bring this up because I think this is an important question. Somebody was asking about small team sizes and how do we do it? Should we have a separate algorithm for small teams? And I replied in the comments, but I'll just sort of make this point because I know lots of people practice in these settings where it might just be 2 people there and a patient arrests. What do we do? And I would encourage you to go back to the algorithm and notice that top part of the algorithm that says how to get started is numbered, and those numbers are meant to be priorities. So if there are only 2 of you, one person should do compressions, one person should get the patient intubated and start breathing. And then remember, you're only giving a breath every 6 seconds, and you can do a lot in 6 seconds. So you give a breath and you run around and you hook up the ECG, and then you give another breath and then you run around and drop some drugs so you're ready in case you need them at the end of the cycle. And then when you get to the end of the cycle and you switch, you go and you do compressions, and the person who's now breathing, again, just keep going back to the algorithm and look at the things that need to be done. But remember that chest compressions and ventilation, that's the money right there. That's how you're going to get most of the patients back. So if you have a small team, focus on the basics, do really good quality basic life support, and don't let the other things in advanced life support distract you from doing that, because that's what's going to get the patient back. Blood flow and oxygen, that's what it takes to get a patient back from an arrest.
Well spoken.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite
it's
phrase
really
so
important.
far is chest compressions and ventilation. That's the money.
Don't need any fancy equipment, right? Don't need to buy a defibrillator.
And I think that is also
Well-
really important to remember.
Yeah.
So thank you for also responding on some of the comments, Dan and Jamie. That's really helpful because they are coming through now that the spamming has stopped. They are coming through really quickly. Someone has asked when the new version of guidelines is available. How long does it normally take?
Jamie, can you answer that one, please?
That's one for Jamie. Yes, go for it.
How long does it generally
Hey,
take?
Jamie, when are they going to be ready?
We
It's
do
been
think
half an
that
hour
there
since we've been
will.
talking,
We do
so-
think that they will be ready in 2021.
Yes.
That's very exciting. I wasn't expecting that to be so soon. You could have really stretched that out.
In fairness, the plan was 2017, and then 5 years, right? And then we were just joking. Like I said, we've been together all week via Zoom, remotely, trying to move some of these things forward. And I commented about the fact that the shared Google folder that we use is labeled Recover 2018. So we don't feel it. We feel a little behind. I'll be honest. We sort of had hit this really nice. We were moving great just at the time COVID hit, which was a real bear for all of us. And it definitely set us back a bit because we are so reliant on volunteers and everyone was so overwhelmed. But I've been really excited over the last month that people who were assigned to questions and who I was emailing, we were all emailing, trying to get moving, we're not responding. Suddenly people are actually starting to respond. So I feel like people have adapted now to life the way it is. And we're making really good progress. Like I said, we have about 150 people and about 72, I think, questions right now, or 71 questions. We're just short of the total number we did last time that are in process. There are a whole lot of searches going on right now, and we'll be getting more and more people brought in the coming months. But yeah, I think we're really excited. Basic life support is very, very far along, which is great. Prevention and preparedness is moving. So we've got a lot of good forward movement, and we're very optimistic that we'll be able to present a lot of guidelines. I don't know if the whole thing will be done. I hope it is, but we're optimistic that a lot of them will be ready for IVEX 2021, which will be in September 2021. We're very optimistic that this is going to be wrapped up by the end of the year.
I submitted it as a talk
So
for the
hopefully we'll have
2021 IVEX. So hopefully it'll be ready. Of course, we've submitted it for the
No
last
pressure
2
then,
years
no
also.
pressure.
Yeah, we said. Yeah.
So I'm just going to say that it is astoundingly 8 o'clock. So our hour is done. I'm just going to have a quick run through just to see if there's anything that we haven't covered. We will put a link up to the Recover page. There's quite a few people asking about enrolling for online training. So we will put a link up, but if you actually loads of people have put links up to the Recover page, so just have a look through there as well. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us from across the world again, especially at 4:30 in the morning. I'm so grateful for you all to join us for this Facebook Live, and it's been so interesting and lovely, and I'm sure Amanda will agree as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's lovely to hear you speak about it.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for 2021 now. No pressure at all, but I'll be knocking on your door at 2021. And yeah, thank you for everyone listening and that has got through the bots to answer questions. Once the bots have finished as well, I will go through all of those comments and just make sure that somehow we have answered everything. And just to remind you all that we do have another event on the 30th with Rachel Marshall from Vets Now and Daniel Fletcher and Ken Yagi from Recover as well, talking about implementation of the Recover guidelines in practice. So some of your questions may come up there as well. And yeah, just I'm very pleased and thank you from me and just from the whole of RCVS Knowledge as well.
Yes, thanks guys for giving up your time.
Thank you all very
Really
much.
good.
All right, then I am going
Thank
to
you very much
try
for having
and
us.
end this smoothly on Facebook, although I'm really good at forgetting exactly how to stop the live video. Shows how technical I am quite a lot of the time. Yep, so the live stream should stop, but thank you so much and have a lovely weekend, guys.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.